Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Good Stuff. I'm Kevin Bille, and as always, we appreciate you spending some time with us today. Really looking forward to today's guest. It's another one that's a lot smarter than me, so that'll be obvious from the get-go and throughout. But nonetheless, just remember, if you're listening, please hit that subscribe button. We would really appreciate it. And of course, any messages you see on social media, retweet and share, that would also be greatly appreciated. Well, hey, today I'm with Brian Levenson, and he is an executive coach and mental performance coach, and also the author of Shift Your Mind, which we're going to get into a lot today. Hey, Brian, man, it's great to have you.
Kevin, thanks for having me.
Well, like I said, we should have hit the record button earlier. Great conversation coming into here, so we'll just keep it going. But hey, mindset is everything to me, Brian. And we've in this season we've talked to Dr. Rob Belle, who I think has been on your pod, Justin Sua, the Rays, who I'm a big fan of. So right off the bat, I just want to ask you, like, what is your definition of mindset?
Yeah, Rob and Justin are both amazing, and to be in their company is actually pretty humbling. And when I first started my career, I connected with Rob, and he was super helpful in my journey. And then Justin, I had him on my podcast, and after we finished recording, I think I then interviewed him for an hour and a half about the field and the industry. And
Nice.
Justin, man, oh man, like anyway, those two guys are are amazing. And so for me, mental toughness is about recovery. It's about responding. And so the working definition that I use is your ability to recover from mistakes under pressure.
Mm.
And the reason why I think under pressure is important is because it's one thing to be able to recover when nobody's watching, which is important. It's a whole nother thing to recover when you're being judged, evaluated, assessed. In sports, people are judged, evaluated, and assessed. It's just the reality of that field and that industry. So I usually separate mindset and mental toughness. So mindset, I actually flip around to set mind, and set mind is an intentional way of thinking. So our mindset, or how we set our mind, is an intentional way of thinking. Now, I can have a really intentional way of thinking, and then I get hit in the mouth.
Yeah, right.
Now I need to recover. That's where I need mental toughness. So I like to distinguish between set mind and what you're doing prior to a performance,
Mhm.
and then what you're doing during a performance to recover, to respond under pressure.
Yeah, that's great. Because at least when I coach, I was always about that. And basketball is a little different. You didn't have time, but it was that next play mentality, right? Like, just get to the next play. And I think that's obviously had an impact on my life. Whereas it's probably different. And maybe you see this in some of your clients. And I'd like to know that maybe next, like, because I think every sport's different. I throw an interception, I got to wait, or I hit a bad shot in golf, I got to wait. Basketball, you can make up for your mistake maybe a half second later. Is there, like, when you're working with them, is there a commonality that you could share with us, excuse me, whether it's a strength or weakness that you see in them that maybe would be relatable to people listening?
We're both basketball guys, but I'm actually going to go to two separate sports. So football and golf.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'll go to football is people that are around our age will remember Ray Lewis on the Ravens and what he would do before the game and,
Yeah.
yell and scream and dance and get himself ready. Well, you probably won't see Rory McIlroy or Tiger Woods or Phil Mickelson or Jordan Spieth or Dustin Johnson or name your golfer do that before they tee off on the first tee. And so sports are different. And by the way, you probably won't see Matt Stover, who kicked with the Baltimore Ravens, and Ray Lewis, who I've been fortunate to spend some time with Matt. You wouldn't see him dancing or getting himself hyped. So I really think that each individual has an optimal zone of functioning that they need to be in for them to perform. And depending on your sport, depending on your role, and depending on what's best for you might be different. So we've sort of glamorized and glorified the idea of getting hyped and getting pumped. And that may help some, but I've been in a college football locker room. I will tell you that sport is a gladiator sport. And you have people in that locker room who are trying to meditate, breathe, get themselves set to where they need to be to focus, to be able to do their job. So I'll start there by saying that each person is different, and each role and each sport has its own nuance and its differences. The similarities for me is really what I wrote my book about, which is that I think the best performers in the world prepare their mind and then shift into a performance mind. And what they
Mhm.
need in their preparation mind may be, and often is, very different than their performance mind. And it's actually often the opposite. So this is the whole framework of my book and the concept. And as I studied performers even beyond sports and music, comedy, speaking, whatever you want to deem a performance business, I noticed these patterns that the best often would shift their mind in preparation and
Yeah.
performance.
Yeah, that's I can see that, and I think the challenge is then for anybody listening as a leader, at least it is for me, if I'm being honest. It was really hard. And I only had 12 guys, or maybe in a small business now. Everybody's different, and so how to treat them, how to react to them, how that's a challenge as a leader.
Kevin, I love the concept of treat everybody different, but hold them all accountable.
Yeah.
And for coaches in sports, it's a hard job. How
Mhm.
do you treat the people differently? Because you know that each of them may need something different. And we've got standards here. There is
Yeah.
a way that we want things to be done. And we have standards that you have to follow. We have expectations of our people. Because if you don't have standards, then you're just a free flowing
Right.
organization. You don't have a culture. You don't have anything to base to base your process on. You don't have a foundation to stand on. So I think that idea of treating everyone different but holding them all accountable is really, really important.
Yeah, it's so funny you say that, because yesterday I was telling a story to the guys here about leaving our best player. I remember we were getting ready to go on the bus from Cleveland to Nashville, and he wasn't there. Like, bus left at 9, he wasn't there. We left. And it's like, I think, I think the guys are really paying attention to that stuff. Girls, if it's or obviously whatever it is in the workplace, I think people pay attention to that from the leaders. So to your point, the standards, they're crucial. I like one thing to know before we dive into your book. I mean, maybe there can be more thrown into this, but this was just my kind of thing, and getting ready to talk to you. Talent, mindset, luck. I think they're all part of it. Rank those in order of importance.
Oh man, I have no idea. I've never been asked that question. In order of importance.
Well, and at the end of the day, it probably you could even go with it, and it depends, right? To cover yourself, because it really does. But I'm just anxious to hear, because I think when you talk to people, some people, they leave luck out of the equation, which I think is a big part. And I think talent and hard work are probably just a given now, but mindset is such a big part of that. So I was just curious, in your work, where do you even stand on those being involved in the process?
Yeah, and you probably will figure out real quick that I have a hard time seeing things black and white. And so I live in this world of polarity. And I almost called my book It Depends. So when you said, well, you're probably thinking it depends, that's right. And the reason
Right.
I think it depends is it depends on where we are in our journey. So if I ask a high school athlete, talent, luck, or mindset, I think for a lot of high school athletes, it's talent. We've all seen a high school kid who doesn't work hard, but they're more talented and they can get away with it. There's no question that they can. I'm sorry. I had a I had a pretty good mindset when I was in high school, but I was 5 foot nothing, 100 nothing, and I wanted to be a basketball player.
Right.
The talent wasn't there. Mindset was probably there, and you could
Yeah.
argue maybe the luck wasn't there, depending on how you view luck. But I think as you go up and as people get better at something, mindset becomes more important. So as we become more talented, then the separator becomes mindset. I think Bill Belichick said talent sets the floor and character sets the ceiling. And so you do have pro athletes who haven't cultivated their mindset, but are talented enough and get by on talent by the time they're professionals.
Mhm.
Absolutely. There are talented pros who haven't cultivated their mindset,
Yeah.
and they might get drafted based on potential, or they might flash and be inconsistent, but still add value in other ways. So look, I think it's hard to be elite at anything without talent. It just
Mhm.
is. I also think talent for me is something that we can develop. I think gifts are more luck. So I would separate gifts. I'm 6'6" with a 7'2" wingspan.
Yeah.
That's a gift. That's luck. Talent is something that we can cultivate. So if I'm talented as a listener, I
Mhm.
can cultivate that talent and get better at it. If I'm talented as a shooter, that's a skill I can get better at, I can improve. So I don't think talent is fixed. And then mindset, the same thing. I think some of us are nurtured or have a nature that does lend itself well to a performance. And then how we cultivate that mindset and cultivate that talent is key. So I think luck is not something that we can control or not something that we can cultivate. Some will say the more you prepare, the luckier you get. Okay, fine. But I don't think it's really helpful to focus on luck. I think if we direct our attention to our talent and to our mindset, then we can actually cultivate that. So I don't know about importance, but from a focus standpoint, I think talent and mindset would be 1 and 2 for me. And then luck would be third, because I think there's nothing we can really do about our luck, but we can do something about cultivating our talent and our mindset.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Well, hey, let's talk about this book, Brian. Shift Your Mind, nine mental shifts to thrive in preparation and performance. I mean, maybe just simply the obvious question, like what made you write it or the why behind it?
So I first thought about this concept when I read Tom Coughlin's book, Earn the Right to Win, which is a terrific book. It shocked me. I loved it. I didn't see it coming that I would really enjoy Tom Coughlin's book. I tend to be a little more new school or progressive with my thinking. And when you think of Tom Coughlin, you think of sort of an old school former military guy. But in that book, he said we need to be humble enough to prepare and confident enough to perform. And when I heard that, I just thought, wow, that is a really profound, simple, brilliant statement. And I started bringing it to my clients. And this was probably in 2013, 2012, so 8 or 9 years ago. And we started to talk about, all right, what does it mean to be humble in preparation? And how does that impact your confidence in performance? And as I started to do that with them, we started talking about, well, what other ways do you need to be different in preparation and different in performance? And what we ended up doing, and this would be with golfers or basketball players or football players, it was my client base is very diverse, is I would have them draw a line down the middle of a paper and just say preparation on one side, performance on the other. And we would come up with 20 of these shifts that they needed to make in their sport. And as we said earlier, some of the golfers would be different than the football players, and that was completely okay. And then I would have them focus in on 3 of the shifts for preparation and for performance. And it helped them have clarity as far as how they needed to prepare and how they needed to perform. And so as I started using this as a framework and a tool, and then I started speaking on it when I went to work with sports teams, it became apparent that this was something I wanted to share with the world and not just with my clients. So when you have something that is just transformative for the people that you serve, for me, the best way to share that with the world was to really go deep and do a deep dive. So I spent about 4 years writing the book.
Wow.
And that's sort of the story of how we came up with it. And the last point I'll say is I think the book is something that once you see, it's really hard to unsee. So I'm getting texts now from people who read it 3 months ago or 4 months ago, and they're saying, Brian, your book, I'm starting to see it more and more and more as I study people, as I see the world. So I think that's a really cool element about the book, is that hopefully it'll be somewhat timeless in terms of how it impacts you and how you see the world.
What about you personally? 4 years, long time, obviously, and you put a lot into it. Did you learn anything? What was the takeaway just for you personally?
For sure. I talk about being perfectionistic in preparation and adaptable in performance. It's one of the chapters or the shifts in the book. And that was something, perfectionism, that I don't think I'd always focused on too much. I'm very good at sort of going for it and then adjusting and being adaptable and nimble and finding a way. But as I was writing the book, I wanted everything to be perfect. And when we were editing and we were working on the cover and we were thinking about the title and all of the elements of the book, I really stepped into this demand for the highest standard of excellence, which is the definition of perfection. And for me, I came out with a new appreciation for that in preparation. Now, perfectionism can also be a complete derailer in performance. So when I say I was perfectionistic as I was writing, it wasn't the actual writing. It was after I wrote, then I really went
Okay.
into how could we make this better? How could we say this a different way that is more concise? So that's something that I realized as I was writing it. I also realized that writing is painful and it is an arduous process, and it's scary to put your words on paper and to publish something and put it in print. And so the scary thing about what you're doing right now is you're going to look back and listen to this conversation and say, gosh, maybe there was something I could have done better. And
Right.
I think anytime you're performing, there's always going to be that element of judgment for ourselves as well as judgment from others. So that is something that is also scary, but I'm glad I put it out there, and I'm glad to see that it's helping people as they think about how they can perform.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wanna get your thoughts. This is probably selfish as I go through everything with the book. The confidence versus arrogance part. I think I'm asking because I want to know which one I am, because I've been told I'm both. But I think that's a really cool part of it because, and I almost like a two-part thing, like because I feel like arrogance, it's almost held against people or given a bad connotation, if that makes sense to you. I mean, so dive into this a little bit for me because I don't know. And does it, man, I'm asking a ton here before I allow you to speak, but does it resonate to people outside of the sports world as much? So just kind of all of that and under that umbrella. And if you forget any of it, I'll come back to you. So sorry to
No,
give you
it's
so much.
interesting you started by saying I'm going to be selfish and asking this. And one of the shifts we talk about is selfish in preparation and selfless in performance. And you even said that as in like, that's a bad thing for me to be selfish. And so I'll
Right.
start by just saying we do label words as good or bad often. And so
Mhm.
fear we think is a bad thing, but fearlessness is good. Selfish is bad, but selfless is good.
Yeah.
Humble is good, but arrogant is bad.
Mhm.
And I want to challenge a lot of those thoughts because I really think it depends
I
on
love it.
when. It depends on when you're using those things. And too much of anything can be a bad thing, but nothing of something can also be a bad thing. If you have no selfishness, if you have no fear, if you have no arrogance, I really think it can derail you and put you into a situation that you're not going to be able to perform as well as you would hope. So let's go to arrogance. To answer your question, yes, I have gotten emails, notes after I speak, someone will come up to me and say, I just can't get with you on arrogance. So I do understand why people have an aversion to the word. If you've ever worked for an arrogant boss, you know how detrimental that can be to your performance. And I get it. And I would argue that we all need to tap into our arrogance when we are performing. So, how do I define arrogance? I think it's important to start there to make sure we're all speaking the same language. It's having or revealing an exaggerated sense of one's own importance or abilities. So let's use Stephen Curry. You're telling me this dude who Virginia Tech, the school that his dad was a legend at, they offered him a walk-on spot out of high school. And so he went to Davidson and then he comes in the NBA and he gets passed over by teams. You're telling me Stephen Curry doesn't have an exaggerated sense of his own abilities when he pulls over a half court and thinks he's in range before the league was not okay with people shooting those shots. People
Right.
forget, Trae Young was not around. These guys weren't shooting those shots back then. So I think we do have to have an exaggerated sense of our abilities, a belief in ourselves that is not going to be based on pure outcome. So a baseball player that's 0 for 3, how is it that they can believe in themselves when they step back into that box for their fourth at bat? A golfer that misses the cut, how can they go into the next tournament and believe that they're capable of winning that tournament? I believe we all need to have an exaggerated sense of one's own abilities. And I would argue, I mean, one of the things I'm fascinated about with you, Kevin, is the Amish, because I would imagine arrogance is not highly valued within the Amish community, the little that I know about it. And I understand why that would be. Put in the work, do your job, be humble. Yes. And if I humble myself in preparation, if I do everything I need to do, then I've earned the right to step into an exaggerated sense of my own abilities. And if we want to do big things and change the world or make a big impact or whatever it is, we need to believe in ourselves more than anybody else does. And often we have limited beliefs that say, hey, stay humble, don't believe in yourself, just play it safe. And we never step into this arrogance. The last thing I'll say is that confidence for me is more of a feeling. Arrogance is a being that you've earned. So I think it takes great confidence to be humble. Hey, I'm confident enough to ask for help. I'm confident enough to say, hey, where can I get better? Where can I improve? And then I need to have confidence to put myself out there to say, yeah, I believe in myself, even if society is saying that I have no reason to believe in myself.
Mhm.
I think those are the people that are better equipped to achieve greatness.
So would you say, Brian, if somebody thinks you're arrogant, do they think that because they lack that belief in self and they lack, like, they don't want to do the work? Maybe is that, and it's just easier for them to, well, you know what, that guy's arrogant because maybe there's some things that they're dealing with themselves that they don't realize truly what it is. Because I can totally get aligned with what you're saying here.
Yeah, I mean, take business. Name a CEO that doesn't have an exaggerated belief that they're capable in doing the job. And if they don't have an unshakable belief that they can do the job, they probably shouldn't be CEO. And that doesn't mean they don't have imposter thoughts or doubts or questions. We all do. And for me, writing a book or coming on a podcast, I have to have a strong
Yeah.
faith and belief that I'm the right person for the job. Now, arrogance is an external perspective. First
Mhm.
of all, I think arrogance doesn't have to be external. It can be simply internal. It doesn't have to
Mhm.
be flexing my muscles. It doesn't have to be telling the world that I'm the greatest, like Muhammad Ali. It doesn't have
Right.
to be Usain Bolt, high step into the finish line. It can be those things, but it doesn't have to be. And so I think that's the other piece of it. The last part to answer your question, I don't know how other people, when they perceive someone as arrogant and the person is maybe in performance, I don't know where that comes from for those people. So I'm not sure on where they're coming from, but I do believe that a lot of people are afraid to go for it. And
Mhm.
so it's easier for them to look at the people that are in the quote unquote arena and say, well, that person's arrogant while you're sitting on the couch. And
Yep.
I think that is a reality for a lot of people. And we label rock stars as high maintenance, for example, when they are the ones that need what they need to go perform, or a politician, for example. We deem them as arrogant, and yeah, they are, and yeah, so are you. But it's when you tap into that arrogance that really matters. And I want to make it very clear. I don't want to be around a bunch of arrogant jerks. There's no question. It's not what I'm asking for. What I'm asking is, how can you be humble in preparation to earn the right that when you are in the arena, you have an unshakable belief in yourself that is not going to stop once you're 0 for 10. It's not going to stop because
Right.
you've missed your first 5 sales calls. It's not
Yep.
going to stop because the business isn't going exactly the way you want it to go. It's this unshakable belief that you're going to find a way.
Well, we used to say "find a way" was a slogan all the time, and all these other things. Man, this is music to my ears, Brian. I'm playing this for my kids as soon as I get home today, because I think it's that winning in the dark or when the lights are off, right? I would tell you, have you earned the right when nobody's watching, so that when it comes time that everybody's watching, once again, you've earned that right, and I think that's. Yeah, I just think that's when all that confidence is built. I don't think people have any idea. I remember as a player, I was in the gym alone a lot, or with my best buddy. Nobody else was there, and so I think all of that was built over so much, and a ton of failure, like a ton, like more failure than success. So I think the other thing that, and maybe this is, we can go into this a little bit deeper off the air sometime, but you doing your podcast, which we're going to get to as well. Like, I think the one thing that a lot of people that I've noticed, the best leaders, and like you, for example, with this, like there's a lot of conviction in your message, right? And at the same time, there's curiosity. So this is a really, really, I love this one. I really feel like it's something the best leaders exhibit, right? So give us a little bit of feedback on this curiosity and conviction.
Yeah, this is actually not even in the book, but it's something that I feel strongly about. If I was rewriting the book, it might be a shift that we hone in on, because I think the older I get, and I'm not that old, but the older I get, I value curiosity more and more and more, because I just think that curiosity is the key to learning. Conviction, this belief in myself, this belief in an idea, is what gets big ideas through. It's what gets us to where we need to be. And the issue that I find is that let's just use COVID, or let's use race in our society. These are two massive conversations that people are having at the time we're recording this. What do we do with the pandemic?
Right.
Should you shut down businesses? Should you not? Should things be open? Should things be closed? Race, police, these conversations that are really hot topics and difficult conversations. I always am trying to stay in that curiosity first. And I find that the more curious I am, then at some point I can become convicted. And I think it's really important to think about for yourself when you're convicted and when you're curious. And there's a time to have conviction and there's a time to be curious. I will say this, I grew up in a household where conviction was appreciated. I
Mm.
was not in a yes sir, no sir house. At the dinner table, you could speak your mind and there was a lot of passion. My parents, both of them, were passionate and spoke their mind. And as a kid, sometimes I probably spoke up too much when it came to adults. And I probably talked back, is how it would be phrased. But I was brought up in a convicted household. And as I've gotten older and older, I've had to try to let go of that more and more because I realize that that conviction sometimes keeps me from learning. And so I've worked really hard to strengthen my curious muscle. And so, for example, right now, I know you're having me on this podcast. I need to be convicted in what I'm saying. I've done the work. I've spent a lot of time being curious. But before we started recording, I was not in conviction mode. I was asking you a lot of questions and wanted to really learn about you because I was curious and I wanted to figure out who your audience is and how I could serve you and how I could potentially help you. So it's interesting because my job is a lot about being curious.
Mm.
But when I write something and I'm on a podcast, it's actually more about conviction. Because if I was just curious this whole conversation, that wouldn't be serving you. I wouldn't be sharing the things that I've learned along my journey. So knowing when to be curious and when to have conviction, I think is really key.
Yeah, for sure. And I should have, thank you for mentioning, I'm probably going in and out of the book with some of these things. So, because I'm just, I'm thinking about some other things. And one of the things I'd be curious about right now, and obviously this isn't in the book, but like you wear a lot of hats, a lot of us do, whether that's husband, parent, author, coach, all this, right? What are some best practices that you could suggest to people that are listening that have helped you in your life with everything that you have going on?
I think when we were trying to schedule this, I was maybe a little bit of a pain in the ass for you, Kevin. And the reason I was a little bit of a pain in the ass is not in I want to be a pain in the ass or high maintenance. It's that I really value creating boundaries in my life that allow me to be there for the people that I love. And it's interesting. I'm getting even like emotional thinking about that. And I think the reason is because I've got a 4-year old and a 5-year old. I've got an amazing wife who supports me in so many ways. I have to be really thoughtful and intentional about being there for them and not being on my phone. And to be
Right.
honest, my phone is really entertaining. Twitter, I love Twitter. I love LinkedIn. This new Clubhouse thing. I mean, it's easy to just jump on there and learn. And if you're super curious, there's going to be a lot of learning that the internet can give us, but I don't think that we need to be in that mode all the time. And so for me, I work really hard to set some boundaries and those boundaries get broken at times. It's not a all or nothing deal for me. And I try to be agile and flexible. And I think people that say they put their family first are usually lying. I think there are times when they put their family first, and there's times when they put their business first. And
Right.
there are times when they put their business first to help their family, and there are times when they put their business first for
Yep.
themselves. And I just think you have to be clear about that. And then the other thing that I've gotten big on is just feedback and advice. And the best advice I ever got was to not give advice unless you've asked for permission first. And so that's something else I've learned, and it's helped me a lot in my relationships with my friends and my family, is to not give advice until the person says, "Hey, I'd like for you to give me some advice here." And the same goes for my clients. Like,
Mhm.
I don't give them advice unless they say, "Hey, Brian, I'd really like for you to give me some advice here." So those are two things. I think boundaries for me have been big. And also, I'm an entrepreneur, so I can decide what I want to do and when I want to do it. Sometimes there's downsides to that. So I have to create boundaries as far as how I'm spending my time because there's always more stuff that I could be doing. And I need to make sure that I'm still serving the people that are closest to me.
Yeah, when you were talking, it just for me, Brian, it's just really hard to shut it off. I mean, my wife will tell me like, "Man, you just cannot go to sleep," and then And like you mentioned, like I love you. You're great on Twitter, and I'm with you. Like there's nothing like opening that up and seeing one of your posts and asking a question or challenging me, and I'm locked in now. You know what I mean? And there's some others on there as well that I follow that. Had I not followed them, I don't think I would, have some of the knowledge that I have today. So the boundaries are important. I hope people heard you clearly there, because I think if you're not setting them in your life, you can definitely go down that rabbit hole in a lot of things.
And Kevin, I am guilty of this. So the reason I need to focus on it is because it's a struggle. And so I have a hard time falling asleep. No question. My wife, last week, she said, Brian, you probably don't need to have your phone on as we're laying in bed, knowing that you're trying to fall asleep in the next hour.
Right.
And so I'm guilty as charged. I would hate for this to come across like I've got it all figured out, because I don't, and I'm working on it, and I'm trying to create systems and be more intentional with my processes. I think I'm about 10 years into this work. And I think for a long time, I just did stuff that energized me, and that was great. But as I get older and I've got kids and I've got priorities, I have to be much more intentional with the systems that I have in place to help me be efficient with how I'm using my time. And so I've recently been thinking about content. I love creating content, but I need to be more systematic as far as how I go about doing it. So Twitter, for example, a lot of times I'll get on the Peloton in the morning and a thought will come to me, and I'll use Twitter as a journal. So I want to then take the thought that I get while I'm exercising, put it on Twitter. Then I'll take that thought and I'll typically put it into a Microsoft Word document where I then can write an article, and I'll write a one pager for my newsletter. And so now I've got the Twitter thought is serving me in the one pager. Then I've got that one pager, and now I'm doing these like cool videos with graphics, like the whiteboard videos that I just stumbled on this software, and I love creating that sort of stuff. So I'm creating those videos now from the one pager. And then my hope is that that content will also be useful for my clients and for a future book. And so now I think there's much more organization. It's more streamlined. And I think I need to continue to create those systems so that this stuff is actually feeding each other rather than just doing what energizes me all the time.
That's great. Yeah, that's really, really good. In fact, if people haven't seen that YouTube video on your book on the website, that's awesome. I love it. Let's just talk about your podcast here, and we'll get into 3-pointers shortly. Intentional Performers Podcast. You just mentioned intentional. I love that word. Brian, what's been your biggest I'd say takeaway? Like, what's been your biggest takeaway from your guest? You've had a ton of them on there. You're continually, producing great content. Is there one, or is there maybe multiple things that stuck out to you?
The biggest one is the name. So it started off as called Beyond the Surface. And as a basketball guy, you probably understand, let's go beyond the playing surface. Let's go deeper and find out what really has led to these people becoming who they've become. And about 30 episodes in, I realized, gosh, all of these people are very intentional with how they're setting their mind. They might have a note in their wallet, or they might meditate in the morning, or they might have a routine before they show up on game day. So they were very intentional with what they were doing and how they were doing. So intention became something that I started focusing more and more on. And I felt compelled to change the name. And so I changed the name to Intentional Performers. And I really believe it is a better summary of what the conversations are about, is what they've intentionally done. Obviously, luck plays a role, as we were sort of talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And I think intention is really big. And so that would be the biggest takeaway, is the people I'm interviewing are very intentional.
That's good. Do you have a best question, or have you found a best question that you ask that gets the most return for you?
On the podcast?
Yeah. Or in general in life.
One of the questions I would say beyond the podcast that I love is, I'll give you two that I like to focus on. One is, what are your dreams? I think people don't ask that question enough. What are your dreams? Like, what do you want in this world? And then two, what's getting in the way? And that's more of a coach question. So when I ask my clients, that question, it often can unlock them to articulate, hey, this is what's getting in the way. But I do believe we often need to focus on what's our vision and what are our dreams and what's currently getting in the way. And and sort of hone in on both of those.
Those are good. Those are good. What about you personally, Brian? Like, how do you grow? I mean, obviously some books. I mean, that's maybe an obvious one, but podcast. What are the best ways that you found you grow?
I mentioned that content process that I've started to create for myself. And a big part of that process is to force me to learn. So every time I go on a podcast like we are right now, I'm listening to your podcast with Mark Shapiro, for example. So it's a forcing function for me to learn. Every time I interview someone, so I've got an interview in 2 days with somebody who's got a new book out. I'm reading his book and it
Yeah.
forces me to read his book. I am constantly, I have a newsletter. I share 3 articles in that newsletter. I have to read those articles if I want to be able to share them. And so I think for me, it's this intention of how do you get to conviction? You have to go into the curiosity mode first. And so I try to constantly stay in curiosity. And then Twitter is the place that I love to play, as you mentioned earlier. I learn there. I
Yeah.
absolutely get to learn from Twitter, and I love to listen to podcasts as a medium. My podcast intake's probably gone down a little bit with the pandemic because I used to listen to podcasts in the car, and I'm just not driving much right now. So
Right.
I miss that element, but it is interesting. Like when I go to the grocery store now for 15 minutes, I'll throw on the podcast and try to listen that way. So I think I'm always trying to learn, always trying to grow, get better. And honestly, people pay me to learn. My job as a coach is to make sure that I know the latest research and the latest theories and philosophies. And so I really think it's part of my job to learn, which is I think I picked a pretty cool job
Yeah.
that teaches me to learn. And then also formal education. I got a master's in sports psychology. I went on and got a certificate in executive coaching. I'm certified in 2 assessment tools. So I'm also a fan of formal education, which I think doesn't get enough shine these days. And I understand there are downsides to paying for those types of formal education processes, but I think there's tremendous value to being in a room, learning in a formal environment. And so that's another way that I've learned throughout my life.
What about book wise? Do you have? We always like to wrap that up before we get into three pointers. Is there a book or two, or however many you want to share, that's left an impact on you?
I love that you asked a book or two because I'm never comfortable answering one
Right.
because, and the reason why is I think it depends on what the person's looking for. So everything I pretty much read is around development, is around growth. So I'm not going to read Harry Potter and
Right.
nothing against that type of work, but fiction or sci-fi, those I'm not really reading. I might watch a movie that I would love to watch, but I don't love reading that. So most of my reading is around growth or personal development, but fiction, there are great books that
Right.
do that, whether it's John Gordon's Energy Bus or Five Dysfunctions of a Team from Patrick Lencioni. I think Five Dysfunctions of a Team is a must read for pretty much any organization. So that's on the fiction side. Nonfiction, I always think about a journey. So there's this book called The Master Plan by Chris Wilson. Chris was arrested for murder when he was 17 years old. He committed the crime. And it's all about his journey before that happened, his journey once he's incarcerated on a life sentence. And spoiler alert, his journey once he actually is able to get out of jail. And his book is emotional. It takes you on this roller coaster. And I think it's really a strong education, especially for people that are listening to this in your community who may never interact with an African-American man from Washington, D.C. And how do you ever understand where that person's coming from?
Right.
I would highly encourage they read Master Plan by Chris Wilson. It's just a remarkable book that will leave you choked up, emotional. And I think that's usually the sign of a great journey book. And then I would go to nonfiction self-help. And those are books that are more similar to my book. Range by David Epstein is a great one. Highly recommend that. And then I think of like nonfiction biographies. And so Andre Agassi's Open is a book that I just really enjoyed. I wouldn't say it necessarily transformed my life, but hearing his journey in tennis and his relationship with tennis, which was positive and negative, I thought it was a great read.
I got to be careful asking this question because I got about 37 books to read at home right now. And then when I get some new ones, I want to go out and get them. Well, hey, we're going to go to 3-pointers and get back to you knocking down jumpers like you did back in the day. All right. So, number one, if people could learn one thing from this talk and just you'd want them to walk away and really hold on to it, Brian, what would it be?
When matters, really get clear on when you need to be in preparation mode and when you need to be in performance mode.
That's good. That's good. I like it. Number two, if Brian could come over here and be Kevin and ask Brian a question today that I did not ask, what question would have you asked?
I got asked once, what am I most proud of? That was a cool question.
That is a cool question.
And the way I answer that is I'm proud of the relationships I have with friends, with family, with clients. Um, I'm most proud of that. And I'm also proud of how I've grown and how I've developed personally and professionally. And then I think I'm most proud of trying to live a life of integrity and doing what I say I'm going to do. And when I say I'm going to create an assessment tool, I go do it. When I say I'm going to write a book, I do it. When I say I'm going to have a podcast, I do it. And so I think that idea of like, what are you most proud of? We talked about confidence and arrogance.
Yeah.
I think of pride also being part of something bigger than yourself. And I'm proud of those relationships. I'm proud of how I try to interact with the world and the family that I have and the friendships that I have. And I think pride is typically something that, there's two sides of pride. We can be too proud to ask for help, but we can be proud of being part of something more than just ourselves. So that would be something that is a cool question to ask.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I love it. Hey, and lastly, good stuff is the name of this. What's some good stuff you can give us in closing before we get into kind of some of your personal things? Anything that you feel is appropriate for this time or just anything you think of when you think of good stuff?
So first of all, I think during this time, giving grace to ourselves. This is tricky. I have bad moments. There's no question. I said relationships are key for me. I'm really struggling with maintaining my relationships right now. I'm used to seeing people, hugging people, fist bumping people.
Yeah.
And the last year has been, my wife and I have it better than 99% of the world with the support that we have, the situation we have. But I miss, at least where we are, I know we're in different locations. Where I am, people are shut down. I mean, my friends have not entered my house in the last year.
Yeah.
And I miss that. I really do. And then if I think about good stuff, which is sort of the opposite of that, I'll leave you with this. I think each person can develop a personal framework for themselves. And I think that is all about the values and getting clarity around your values. It's all about your mission and why you do what you do. It's about your personal philosophy and the way in which you interact with the world. And it's about a vision and what you will do in the future. And so I often create a personal framework with my clients. And I think that's usually good stuff when they can create that framework for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. That is good stuff. Well, yeah, thanks for the vulnerability there and just the overall authenticity. The jumper's still good. You knocked them all down. So,
my dad used to say, I played point guard, obviously, when you're 5 foot nothing, 100 nothing, that's where you're playing. And I used to come down. This was a long time ago. This wasn't a thing, but I was ahead of my time. I used to come down and almost always I'd jack up a top of the key 3-pointer, especially if they were in a 2-3 zone.
Oh, yeah.
And I would make it a lot. And my dad would always get annoyed. He coached me. He'd get annoyed when I made it. Everyone else would be like, yeah. And he'd be like, oh, because he knew then I was going to think that that's what I should be doing for the rest of the game.
Right.
But my thinking back then was like, if I can make this 3 at the top of the key, then everything, they're going to have to come out and guard me right from the beginning. And now I can fake that and throw it into the post or throw it to the foul line or throw it over the wing and play that way. But yeah, I would be pretty fearless and sometimes it backfired, but I was a little I was a little shit, and I like to come across half court and make them in range. And I was ahead of my time too. I didn't have much of mid range game. I had a floater that I used, but I liked to either get threes or take the ball into the lane and then pass or get fouled and get to the free throw line. There wasn't that much finishing because I was really small and couldn't jump like Nate Robinson. So I was limited in talent, but I think the people that grew up with me playing ball, they liked the way that I
That's
competed, and
great.
that I take pride in. Those are the glory days. 7th, 8th grade, that was peak for me in a lot of ways. It was downhill from there, but you said you used to play in a game, a weekly game. I was playing before the pandemic hit in a Wednesday night game, and that three ball is not there anymore.
Yeah.
It's not where it was. It's
Yeah.
amazing that it went. The passing is still there. It's the only part of me that's
Yeah, it
that's
goes
still
away.
there.
It goes away quickly, but yeah, some other time I'll get some advice for you on how to coach my sons and not screw that up. Hey, where can let's start with social media, Brian. Let people know where they can find you at on social media.
So when we mentioned Twitter, it's at Brian Levenson, and I would say the other place that I'm most active is LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn, and so I love connecting with people. That's a big part of how I operate in this world. And LinkedIn, I just think is a great place for connection and sharing. So Twitter and LinkedIn are at Brian Levenson.
And then your website.
It's strongskills.co. Strongskills.co. I always joke when we went to create the website, the .com costed like 50 grand. And I looked at the designer developer. I said, this can't be worth 50 grand. They said, nope, just get the .co. So here we are. We've got strongskills.co.
And then your podcast, I'm sure that can be found on all formats. How often are you providing those, Brian?
It's weekly. And so we started it. This is year 5. So we started it 4 years ago. And so we've had over 200 episodes. And if there's a lot of basketball heads, we've had a lot of basketball coaches on there, basketball players. I just did an interview with Kyle Korver, who's just remarkable. And so the podcast is Intentional Performers. You can get that anywhere podcasts are listened to.
And then finally, is there a best place to purchase the book that you'd like to let people know about?
I mean, Amazon tends to be the easiest, and it's called Shift Your Mind. So you can go there, but you can go anywhere books are sold. There's a lot of independent bookstores that carry it as well. And if you just Google it, you should be able to find it pretty easily. And the only other thing I'll promote is I have a newsletter that comes out once a week. It started a decade ago, and it used to be called Brian's Message of the Day. So I used to send out an article, a quote, a video, research, and then I just realized that nobody wants to get something in their inbox every single day, or at least most people don't. And so I changed it to Message of the Week, and that's where you'll typically get an article from me, and then 3 articles that I'm reading, and then there's usually a video and my podcast each week, and then I'll usually have a quote or something that I'm thinking about in there. And so you can subscribe to that pretty easily. Just go to my website again, and you should be able to subscribe to that there as well.
Well, great. Well, hey, Brian, thanks for spending time with us. I appreciate obviously all the insight you provided. I think you can tell this is something you have a great deal of passion for, and it's apparent that you've spent a lot of time on it and have a firm belief in it. So thank you for encouraging us today. Keep doing what you're doing. I love your work. I think it's awesome, and I hope a lot of people that maybe haven't heard about you or the book now or all the other resources that you have will connect with you in some way.
Kevin, really honored to be here. As we said earlier, some of your guests are people that I look up to and that I study from. And so to be in their company is an absolute honor. And I love what you're doing, and I love what you're stepping into. And I love your little good stuff sign behind you. And so looking forward to continuing to get to know you better and learning about everything you're doing and your journey. And hopefully we'll continue to have more good conversations in the future.
Yeah, likewise. I don't doubt it. Well, hey, everybody, thanks again for listening. Man, there is a ton in here today that I know is going to be extremely valuable to you. I know we talked about Twitter here a couple of times. If you have not yet seen Brian on Twitter, get over there and follow him. It really is some good stuff. I enjoy it. And if you get a chance, get out there and buy that book too, and all the other resources once again that he offers. Thanks again. And until next time, good stuff.